The theme for this morning's discussion is World of Work, COVID-19, the new normal. My name is Orville Taylor, and I'll be moderating this discussion, and it will continue until 12 noon. We are streaming live on JIS and the ministry's Facebook, YouTube, and as well as on the ministry's website. You can leave us a comment, and if you have questions, and you can share this live with others. I'm going to be introducing our panelists, many of whom need very little introduction. So I will be simply introducing without any extensive bio. First up, and this is a running order, we have Mr. Rudolph Thomas. And now Mr. Rudolph Thomas is the Vice President of the Bustamante Industrial Trade Union. Mr. Temba Mkize is the youth representative from the Society for Future Policy Leaders. After that, we have Ms. Deborah Fraser, who's the CEO of Caribbean HR Solutions. We will also have Senator Lambert Brown, who's the president of the University and Allied Workers Union, Dr. Leith Dunn, who is head at the University of the West Indies Mona unit of the Institute of Gender and Development Studies. And we will be also joined at the tail end of the discussion. He was originally scheduled for yesterday. He's going to join us today, though. Mr. Richard Wan, no, Mr. Wan, who is the president of the Jamaica Employers Federation. So without further ado, certainly we are trying to be as tight with time as possible, we are going to ask the participants to speak. Now, we'll be talking about a number of things: layoffs and job cuts, remote working arrangements, income support arrangements, legislative framework, very important, the expectations moving forward. This is a new normal, absolutely. In a little bit, rather, before we have the first presenter, we are going to be having the welcome and the message from the ministry. You would have seen the Minister of State, Mr. Xavier Main, who would have been scheduled to, but Ms. Gillian Carrodos, and yesterday on another program, I got her title wrong, and I'm not going to do it this today, but she is going to be carrying those messages. And of course, I'm going to ask her to say, so that I don't make any mistake again, what her proper title is. I heard I got it 99% right. After which, though, after we go through the presentations, which will be, 10 minutes maximum each, and I will be giving you the signal if I think that you're running too far, because we are trying to manage this as tightly as possible. And then we will take question and answers from 11:40, and then we will do the wrap up, all things being equal and technology permitting, at 12 noon. So without any further comment from the chair, let me welcome Ms. Gillian Carrodos. Good morning. And I'm not hearing her.
We're still all muted.
But I'm not hearing her. Are you hearing her?
No.
I'm not hearing Gillian. So I think that you need to.
I have overcome the technological challenge.
It happens.
Thank you very much.
This is a new normal.
The Ministry of Labor and Social Security, I want to thank you, Orville, for hosting today part 2 in a 2-part series, Labor Talks. And what it basically is, as you've said, is an opportunity to have social dialogue. So while we keep our physical distancing, I think I got it right this time, while we keep our physical distancing, it is very important for us to realize that there are real challenges that has been presented by COVID-19. Challenges relating to job losses, challenges relating to employers having extreme difficulties, challenges relating to job seekers not having a clear understanding as to what their opportunities will be. Challenges nationally, challenges regionally, challenges internationally. And Yesterday, we had a chance to talk about the international and regional perspective. Today, we're going to drill down. We're going to actually look at the problem, the challenges, the solutions from an organizational perspective. We're going to be having some very rich discussion from trade union leaders, persons who are in there with the workers, understand the concerns of workers. We're going to be speaking from the employer's perspective. I'm happy that David Wan, President of the Jamaica Employers Federation, will be joining us today. We're going to be hearing from persons who are in the field for a very long time. I expect that Senator Lambert Brown will also be joining us shortly. And we will definitely want to hear from one of the quote unquote sectors that has been in the news for quite a while now with COVID-19, the business process outsourcing organizations. And we have a representative today who will really explain to us some of the issues that has confronted that sector and how they have worked together to rise above the challenges. And we want to commend this sector because as a ministry, the Ministry of Labor has had interventions that have proved very fruitful, as well as all other ministries and departments that have had to work with this sector. We will have a gender perspective, and we could not have a session like this without involving the persons who will lead us tomorrow, our youth. And we want to have the youth give a perspective because Jamaica really, in a few years, belong to our youth leaders. So I want to welcome all our listeners. I envisage that this is going to be one of those discussions that will set the pace for a lot of further discussions and positive action in relation to policy and legislative reviews. Thank you very much, and sit back, relax, listeners, and the Ministry of Labor will ensure that you keep abreast of the current events in relation to labor market issues. Thank you.
Well, and thank you very much, Ms. Carrodos. I think everybody in the panel knows just how important this is for me. This is pretty much a life work, and I was going to say it's a kind of like a homecoming, but you know, it's like I never left. But without any question, the Ministry of Labor and Social Security has constantly been doing these things, you know, and this is a wonderful opportunity for the public to have a clearer understanding of what the ministry is doing, has been doing, and will be doing constantly as we deal with this reality. Mr. Rodolph Thomas, Vice President of the BITU, you will now have the mic, sir.
Morning, everyone. It's a pleasure being here. I think it's a very important forum that we engage, and we engage at this time. I want to start from a position of saying that while the world of work has been rapidly changing for the greater part of the decade, COVID-19 has served as a catalyst which imposes not a will, but an absolute requirement for members of today's borderless economy to assess, examine, and implement such changes as would guarantee their continued existence and success. Now, while persons, this is where I'm a little bit different now, because while persons have been referenced as where we are today as the new normal, I prefer to consider us to be in an adjusted state of operating. I think that we are in pursuit of that normal, because I believe that the normal hasn't really identified itself as yet. As we speak today, protocols will be drafted indicating how we operate in certain industries. The ILO continues to come out with its guidelines. Our government continues to carry out its initiatives. And we know that we will require legislative change and amendments. So from my perspective, it might be a little bit premature to call where we are today the normal. The trade unionists in me calls me to focus more heavily on the immediate concern of a particular demographic of workers, and that is work being done from home. These work from home arrangements that have been put in place. The global crisis forced millions of workers from various industries into working remotely as workplaces were gradually or abruptly closed worldwide, and that's a fact. Several employees reacted to the declared pandemic and have designed some form of policies. But we find that well-grounded policies would be grounded against certain principles of accountability, integrity, trust, definitely quantitative measures of input and output, which would have changed over time, as well as timely communication and update of staff and all stakeholders. Unfortunately, we find that there are still organizations that are yet to put out clearly defined policies in place. You have others that may have had some semblance of policies previously, but I believe some of them have failed to recognize the enormity of the paradigm shift that has been occasioned by the pandemic and to appropriately adjust those policies. And this I've found has come with a myriad of issues. Now, while the crisis starts to subside in some parts of the world and employees return to their offices, the pandemic invites us to review the mass remote working experience that we ourselves have gone through thus far, and to look at both threats and opportunities that it provides for the future success of the organizations involved. We would have had a callback of the workforce or an easing of the requirement to work from home to allow for workers to return to the physical workspace. We believe that that doesn't have to all be done at once or at the same time. But it's a definite situation where it has to be done over a period of time and in conjunction with the policies that have been developed. But we are finding that there are still some organizations that quite frankly seek to exploit workers just by shifting the significant elements of what we define as the cost of doing business to their employees. Some of them who are just happy to have a job. And I refer to those who seek to force employees to work remotely, even after COVID crisis wanes, and to close their branches or their departments, their offices, in the hunt to increase short-term gains. We believe that these employers must recognize, however, that there are risks involved in this approach, and that any move towards expanding mass remote working must be accompanied by the necessary support and structures, and must be planned for the long run with employees' well-being, health and safety, etc. in mind. While we'll be treating with a pandemic today, this is not the only thing that can cause levels of disruption to our economy and our work. We all know this. Where we are located geographically, we are susceptible to natural disasters such as hurricanes and earthquakes. And this fact calls for us to be forward-thinking and pragmatic in our approach with the arrangements that we are making in relation to working from home. It is without question that we will never return to the same mode of working as existed prior to COVID-19. And there are mutual advantages that can be achieved from having the arrangements in place, proper arrangements in place for work from home. Against that background, I want to advance the following consideration. One, continue to offer remote work, but don't force it. While not all employees, I should say, will avail themselves to the opportunities of working from home, we know that as time goes by, there will be a stronger demand for remote working. But not everybody is suited for remote work. And we must acknowledge that there are risks involved in excessive remote working. And that includes the fact that we're moving to a situation where people are more isolated. You have depression that can take set, lower innovation and creativity, because people are now operating where they are separated from their the spontaneity of human interaction that is usually characterized in the physical workplace. We believe that employers must be flexible so as to retain and attract the best talent at all times. Don't look at the short term alone. But one thing I want to emphasize is that we should remain cognizant that women are one of the most disadvantaged groups when it comes to working from home. And this is based on the several challenges that they face in executing their roles within the home, and I mean the various roles that they play. The second point, 2, would be recognize the difference and prepare for the long run. Prepare for the long run can be overemphasized. Remote working under normal circumstances is different from what we are experiencing now. And employers must be able to find that or know that difference. With the immediacy that we saw with the stay-at-home orders, persons wouldn't have got the opportune time to prepare. You have that time to prepare now, and you ought to make sure that whatsoever you put in place has true value. They should take the time, employers should take the time to practice, to develop best practices and to improve their work processes in IT infrastructure, etc. Health insurance provision and sick day policies and other things that workers would benefit from in the normal work arrangement must be carefully considered, because they are now working away, but you still have certain responsibilities that are maintained. 3, create a new culture and rethink how to measure work. It's important. In the past, an employee would have offered remote work based on the company's culture and emphasis put on the presence of the person physically being at work. But now we have seen that change. And we believe that companies should capitalize on the COVID experience to build new, more inclusive work cultures. We have been suddenly plunged into this adjusted state of operating, it is my term, as many employers do not have the right tools in place to set goals to measure outcomes. Presently, presence and productivity are to be noted as completely different. So there has to be new tools, new ways of measuring productivity that is put in place. 4, pay attention to employment and health issues. Cannot be overemphasized. Post-COVID-19 has certain hazards that will need to be managed. Research has suggested that the very deterrence of the spread of COVID-19 virus, such as separation, isolation, and distancing, are contrary to our culture and the way we operate and the way our workplaces operate and how we have been groomed from we are young entering into the work world. Employers must ensure that the work conditions are not unduly stressful. We know that job insecurity, unsafe workspaces, and the fear of losing income are stressors that affect workers all the time. So we must ensure that we try to alleviate that when we are doing our plans going forward. And outside of just providing workers with a health plan, determining how to monitor the employer's obligation to provide workers with a safe work condition must be subject for serious consideration, because that has not gone anywhere. The employer still has that obligation. Our ASH bill is cited as an act to provide for a balanced framework to secure the safety and health of workers and for connected matters. And it would therefore, in my estimation, and I guess I don't think anybody would object to it, it would be meaningful to advance those considerations contained in the bill that protect workers while we are in this altered state of operating. In fact, we believe that the bill itself should be expedited as much as it can be, so that we can holistically take advantage of our learnings from COVID-19. And the 5th and final point that I wanted to raise is to respect employees' privacy and the right to disconnect. We know that invasive measures have been used to determine whether workers are working or not. Cameras on the laptop that monitor, turn on and monitor whether or not you are working. We're saying that when you're in people's personal homes and their private space, you have to respect the right to privacy. And you must respect the right for them to disconnect. We're talking about the whole issue of work-life balance and the separating work life from their livelihoods and the gains that are pursued by the employer. So in closing, I just want to suggest that neither workers nor employers should seek to abuse the crisis. The obligation of the worker, as is grounded in the Labor Relations Code, for example, remains fully intact. But at the same time, so does the employer's responsibility and obligations to legislation, policy, and contracts of employment. Support from employers for workers can't just be lip service at this time either. In this situation, which finds many workers hanging on to the opposite side of the knife from the handle, we have to ensure that the organizations treat with employee issues fairly if they are to reap the success from the whole working from home arrangements that they are putting in place. That's the area I wanted to focus on this morning. I know we will go into other things as soon as we start deliberating.
Well, it didn't surprise me. You're a trade unionist. Some very interesting points which you raised. Hopefully we'll be able to get the kind of responses that are consistent with those points. Up we have Mr. Nkize. How are you, sir? You ready for us? All right. Could you unmute his mic for me?
Hello, hearing me now?
Yes, I'm hearing you now, yes.
Good morning again, everybody. I'm here to represent the perspective of the youth. So just like everybody else, COVID-19 has had a significant impact on us as youth, as it has older generations and will have on future generations, at least for the next few generations. It will have an impact on the way we work, on the way we operate as social beings. It will have an impact on every aspect of life, and necessarily so. But what this does is it gives us the opportunity to participate and build intergenerational solidarity that can lead us to a brighter, better, and more equal future, where opportunities that exist currently are actually reaped. We put in place the mechanisms to ensure that we don't fall into the trap of cyclical inequality, of cyclical disenfranchisement, and of underutilization of the opportunities that are presented to us. For youth, this has been our second major global financial crisis in our lifetime, and it's been a pretty short lifetime. This is projected to have significant impacts on the long-term economic prospects because youth will likely struggle with debt, have lost income due to unemployment or underemployment, have their education and future earning capacity disrupted, and in turn, that disrupts our income earning capacity in a way that previous generations would not necessarily have had to contend with. This means that money management skills, understanding how financial markets work and entrepreneurship work will be critical in designing the labor forces of the future and in capitalizing on the opportunities at hand, but they will also protect youth as best as possible from future financial shocks and disruptions and help us to recover and build beyond the ones that have passed. I'm also a part of the National Youth Parliament. I'm actually a team leader for the post-COVID-19 planning, and in brainstorming and sifting through a lot of the issues that youth have to contend with, we came to the conclusion that there were certain key areas that it made sense for us to focus on. That includes financial education, youth entrepreneurship, social entrepreneurship, and the monetization of social entrepreneurship, and even policy reform to the extent where, like the National Housing Trust, Mr. Ashani Granville put forward the possibility of us designing a tax or a trust fund that would be drawn from youth, almost like an NIS type scheme or a NHT type scheme, where you could cash in whatever you don't use by age 40 or so. But until then, you will have this source of, or this pool of funds that you can tap into should anything happen. But the crux of all of this is education. Designing the labor force of the future will necessarily come down to how we educate the students and the youth of today and how they're engaged in the employment market. Education needs to be more practical, we think. So currently education is very classroom centric, and it doesn't automatically relate to the community. Students don't go home automatically feeling like what they have learned is implementable in the communities that they're living in currently. So it makes sense for education to start out, yes, with the academic and the theoretical side, but also an implementation of that. So we should be breeding pracademics, practically oriented academics, right? So, for example, a world where that is occurring, we could possibly see things like at the end of a writing course, then a compendium is made for all of the students, where all of them give a contribution to that final compendium and it's published. What does that do? It gives them a practical orientation of what and how they will be operating within the world of work, for one, but it also builds team building skills from the beginning, from the inception of their education and their learning process. There's an automatic linkage between education and operating in society. So it's not just to go and get a job, it's to make a contribution to the community that you're a part of. That needs to be a fundamental part of how we educate students. And I think that will work well when we start looking at the future economy, the circular economy, the green economy, the blue economy. Certainly, that those will be very science intensive, and building, construction, creating and putting articles out there for practical use to enhance the lives that people are living needs to be ingrained in the Jamaican culture. That needs to be a fundamental part of the workforce that we're designing for tomorrow. We need to build a culture of production, a culture of creation for youth, not just of seeking out opportunities in economic markets only. Because when we start looking and focusing too heavily on markets, we start to undermine the human element, and what that does is, and what it has done, this is a proven fact, it's bred inequality over the last few generations, and we don't want that to be perpetuated going forward. So we think that COVID-19, it has come with its social ills, but what it has given us is an opportunity to respond to a lot of the problems that we have in our current societies with innovative policy implementation, including in education, but beyond that, also a new orientation of our government. South-South cooperation is a concept that has been around for a long time, but in terms of operationalizing it, it hasn't been, we haven't been particularly successful in that aspect. We believe that the labor market of the future should see people traveling, working between, especially considering the opportunities granted by technology, which is what we have on our side that past generations may not have had in the same way. You know, it gives us the opportunity to really start to integrate our economies as supply chains start to bottleneck around the world, and developed countries. We have seen it in the global political economy right now. A lot of the countries that we're looking to for leadership have started to fragment the international landscape because of self-interest. And who suffers the most from that? It's the underdeveloped regions like Jamaica, like the Caribbean, like Africa. And the youth in these regions really pay the price as they continue to fight against generational constraints in our economic capacity and our national development. So that is something that we want to focus on a lot. So to conclude, I would say that as far as the youth perspective goes, we need to start utilizing the legislative framework that already exists, like flexi work, that's particularly underutilized. The truth is that the attention span of youth is not, we're not oriented to the world of work in the same way that you guys were, the older generation was. We don't necessarily want to spend the entirety of our careers focused on one field, highly specialized. A lot of us want to generalize, want to take skills that were traditionally used in one discipline and transfer it to another discipline. And we actually do have mechanisms that allow for that type of multidisciplinary responses. Flexi work could potentially be one of them. As the gig economy starts to and continues to develop in the more developed countries, and it's trickling into the Jamaican economy as well, we're going to see more and more young people start resisting traditional employment terms, especially as more opportunities start to prop up, especially with more financial education that past generations might not have had access to, and with new market opportunities internationally. That said, we also need to focus on developing a certain level of internal sustainability. CARICOM would be very important to this, and a major part of the CARICOM framework is the free movement of labor. So we're integrated in that way, but what undermines this is the fact that our economic integration has not been fast-tracked. Neither has the integration of our fiscal policy or monetary policies. And as a result of that, there tends to be a high level of friction between the economies. So there's not a smooth transition, especially for people who aren't educated with traditional education. There tends to be a lot of friction in trying to participate in those markets and taking advantage of opportunities in that. So fluidity definitely becomes important in South-South cooperation and in regional cooperation. And in our domestic planning, as I said, we need to start moving towards more resilient economic orientation, which includes science like blue economy, for example, harvesting wave energy, harvesting. The Caribbean Development Bank published a report about how lucrative the blue economy can be for reorienting the entire Caribbean. And it is also a prime opportunity for the countries of the Caribbean to pool their resources, especially the resource of water that we have, to create, a global, maybe not a superpower, but a strong contender on the global market by pooling our collective labor, our collective sway, and by specializing our labor force so that our labor force can be specialized in multiple future sustainable oriented jobs, energy production, energy harvesting, redistribution, battery technology, things like that. So those are the considerations that we want to see. It all starts with education for us and utilization of the current legislative framework like flexi work, but also an expansion of the utilization of that. And as we see how it operates, we can continue to build and add on, but we definitely have to move quickly. In Jamaica, I think the practicalization of education is particularly important because when we look at the Jamaican workforce currently, 69% of males have never achieved any sort of certification according to Statin. 49% of females, the same. And then as we go up, it's marginal, the amount of people at each level having 1 or 2 CSEC passes, 3 or 4 CSEC passes, and that's the end of it for them. So where our traditional educational sector has fallen short, a way for us to sort of bridge the gap in terms of our resources or access to education and the orientation of our people to education, we can start using practical community-based education where projects are undertaken. Students are the forefront of building the future of Jamaica. That's the type of educational system that we want to send. we feel like if we accomplish that, then the labor markets will take care of themselves, you know, and we'll have more satisfied workers. We'll have a Jamaica that is built uniquely. It's not necessarily an approach that has been taken elsewhere, but we have to take unique contextualized approaches. Yeah, that's the perspective of the youth, as far as I've gathered.
You have to unmute.
It's certainly more than an earful, and I think that the future clearly is in very good hands. As a matter of fact, it sounds almost as if he has already taken it, doesn't it? I tell you. I want to, at this point in time, though, acknowledge a number of persons who are paying attention, and in particular, one of the best courses and best cohorts of students I've ever taught, and that's the MSc HRD Master's Program here at the University of the West Indies, the same university there that young man is from. I tell you. It's a sobering revelation, you know. I listened to Rodolphe earlier on speak about some of the challenges, and these are very, very, very real challenges which you're going to be addressing there, and Gillian is listening to them as well. But here's something very sobering before we move on to Deborah, who is in the business of employing and redeploying and training people, that we have an unemployment rate pre-COVID, which was somewhere around 6-7%, but youth unemployment rate, the youth unemployment rate is 3 times the national average. And female youth unemployment, despite all of this men at risk thing and the fact that we can't find men in our classes at the university, that female youth unemployment, taking away all of that, is still almost 4 times the national average. We're going to go forward right now. Ms. Fraser, who's been paying full attention, and she's nodding her head. So I know we're ready for her now. Bless you. Go ahead.
Thank you. So Orville, I'm here in the capacity of being the secretary for the GSAJ, so the Global Services Association of Jamaica. Gloria Henry couldn't make it today, but I'm just here to give an overview of really the impact and kind of the response from the Global Services Association membership and what has really happened over the last almost 3 months now, believe it or not, that this pandemic has affected us and we've been reacting to it. So I'll just start by saying that, just reminding people of what we are. So global services, it really has to do with, it's not just customer service, which we call business process outsourcing. We are also focused on information technology outsourcing. So we've got software developers, a lot of support for international networks that are here, supported here in Jamaica, knowledge processing outsourcing as well. So myself, so we do HR outsourcing, which falls under knowledge process outsourcing. There's legal process outsourcing, marketing process outsourcing. So it really is a global trend that's happening globally. And the association exists to support companies and investors who are here to operate in those spheres. We are not, our role really isn't to mandate to any of the companies that are part of our membership what they can and can't do. They know that they have to follow the laws of Jamaica. They work closely with the Ministry of Labor. And I just have to call out the Ministry of Labor. They've just been, I would say 5 years ago to now is just so, they've really increased their support, and they work directly with centers that are employing almost 40,000-45,000 people in this industry now. They're very reactive. So we are not prescriptive, but we do provide an enabling environment. So that's kind of our role, and I just wanted to let people know that. So when the pandemic hit, you'll recall just dates. We had the flight of folks who came in on the airplanes, and we tried to find them. And then the timing from importing the virus to the response of the GSAJ, our membership, we were actually proactive, which is kind of the personality of the sector. So by March the 2nd, so early March, we'd already developed a set of guidelines to support the operations of all of our members through the pandemic. The guidelines were shared and supported by the Ministry of Health and Wellness. They're based on the Disaster Risk Management Act. Even though it was changing, we started to just develop a framework of constantly communicating and supporting our membership with each rev of the DRMA. And we even shared our guidelines with the non-GSAJ members, so folks who just never enrolled, but we still kind of put all of our information and guidelines out there. The strategies really focused on the installation of hand washing stations, the mandatory wearing of masks in our environments, site certification by the Ministry of Health and Wellness, and adherence to strict social distancing rules. And even as those changed, we had to, rally the troops and help to get the changes out. Daily temperature checks of employees, which is important. I'll talk about that a little bit more shortly. And working remotely wherever possible. All of those seem very simple, but if you recall, because we started so early, that it was difficult. Each step was difficult. We had to provide practical help in just getting, figuring out how we could source some of this new equipment and getting them into Jamaica through customs and just kind of helping, again, just providing an enabling environment so that they can operate. That's our role. We also sought waivers. So we talk about work from home now. And for companies who are not in the GSAJ, you can just have the employee use their computer at home. But for us, because most of us operate in the SEZ, so a special economic zone, which is duty free. So in order to move those computers out, there's a lot of work that had to be done to be able to allow our membership to implement work at home. You just can't pick up a computer and just send it home. So just a lot of work that was done. I'm still recovering from it, to be honest, as I'm sure everyone is. But in terms of results, and we look at numbers, like our work environment, all of our members, that's one thing they do. In terms of productivity, we look at numbers. In terms of impact and investment, it's always, do the numbers make sense? So when I'm looking at all this work that was done from the beginning of March, even to now, we only had 4 confirmed cases of the COVID-19 virus. And again, in context, Alarica was not a member of ours. So they could have downloaded the information that we were sharing. But in terms of our membership represents about 85% of the employees in the sector. So we're talking over 35,000 folks and just 4 cases. And these 4 cases were folks that were already deployed from work from home by the time the cases were caught. And also those 4 sites voluntarily closed their site. It was their own screening tools that picked it up. So I just wanted to say those things because I feel like sometimes with the whole Alarica thing that the whole industry is getting painted with this brush and we're missing some of the success stories in terms of how do you keep 35,000 young people safe from the pandemic and spreading and catching the virus. And there was a great, wonderful story that I feel got missed. So somehow we were able to keep it to just 4 cases that were work at home and avoid possibly a huge disaster just by acting proactively. All right, so other things that in terms of the impact, I'm drawing attention to our membership that there was significant increased operational costs. In order to react fast, you have to import a lot of things. You have to actually put people out of your environment, but you still have to pay for that environment. And I'm sure that's not just for the GSAJ, but I'm calling this out for a lot of workplaces now who have to send people home and who are now returning to work, but only able to have a few people in work. So your costs really don't go down much. So it's a big sacrifice for the company, and it's careful because you don't want to kill any industry by having those increased operational costs with any decrease of revenue as well. Our business continuity strategies, we looked at that as well. So work from home, and also you've heard about the hotel residents. So almost 1/3 of the industry was working from offsite. And so that's kind of the impact again, speaking to some of the things that Rudolph was talking about. So there's a lot of new issues that come with moving people to work from home, which again, we can't prescribe anything for, that's not our role as an association, but we do work closely with the regulatory and government authorities to bring knowledge and to bring new standards and share it among our membership. There's increased transportation. Some folks, I don't know if this happened for everybody, but we certainly had to start taking people in and taking them all the way home to their doorstep for thousands and thousands of people. So that's another cost and a service that we rose to the occasion to do. And the voluntary closure of sites. I mean, I'm a business owner as well. I didn't have any cases, but I'm seeing very, very large centers, like every minute costs a lot of money. And they've actually voluntarily closed their sites in order to keep their people safe. And again, I'm just calling that out, that did happen several times without any prompting from any government entity. I will also just talk about general numbers in terms of layoffs. So this might be interesting to some people. So out of the over 40,000 folks in this industry that are employed, around 7,500 persons were laid off. It could have been much, much, much worse, much worse. So those are the numbers for layoffs. In terms of job cuts, so folks that were made redundant, there was around 720 persons. So again, could have been way worse, but that's minuscule compared to the numbers. And I think that's because of the quick reaction. Income support. So most of our, again, we don't prescribe it, but I think because there's this environment of sharing best practices, and I think the companies here always are concerned about their brand and wanting to do what's the best practice is, because they know that it will impact their ability to attract and retain staff. The employers offered a variety of support, ranging from, partly paying salaries during the lockdown. We've seen a ton of companies offering care packages, paying extra for sick employees, and just making sure that income, like no one wants to lose their employees. Unlike another industry where you're investing in the products that you're selling, the products are the people. And if the people go, everyone loses. So we're doing all that we can to keep the people taken care of, even though the revenue is seriously impacted. Some of the other measures include, the suspension of any attendance KPIs. So we talked about productivity and how I really am passionate about finding ways that we can make our people more productive and drive our index really up, because we measure performance by the minute. We also used to pay extra incentives if you had a perfect attendance for the month, for example. With the COVID pandemic on us, we had to remove all of those KPIs so that employees could just feel free to stay home if they are sick. So there's a lot of these things that were going on in the background, so many things that caused an impact and we had to react to. And it's really creating a new normal now. But I think all in all, in terms of our future outlook, we're very, very positive. You have to kind of look for the silver lining, and not just that, you have to be opportunistic. They say every time that there's a crisis, that's the time for an opportunity. And we're seeing things like a new tech infrastructure where global companies are now demanding that service providers do things like security monitoring and disaster recovery activities. And those are things that are done here in Jamaica. So it's digital type of work that is now, we're seeing some more of that come in. We're doing that at smaller scale, and now it's getting, moving towards medium scale. I'd also just say that, in terms of smart supply chains, so now you're seeing more companies having services that require digital services and other type of services that we support, like curbside services are emerging. I don't know how that's going to go for Jamaica, but certainly when that happens abroad, it impacts us because we're servicing those types of clients. So I think that's opportunistic as well. And I think overall, I'll just kind of end by saying that I feel like it's been very clear that the GSAJ has been greeted with a lot of support from folks that are on the governance side. The government has been very, very involved. They've been looking at data. They've been looking at our environments. The Ministry of Health has been amazing. Ministry of Labor as well. Like everyone's rolled up their sleeves. I know people are kind of galvanizing and, you know, looking at what's important. And I have to say, I'm very impressed with what all the parties have been doing to support the folks that are employed in this industry. It's very impressive. You've seen it kind of in the press if you've been paying attention to some of the articles that are coming out. No one's perfect, but we've been getting kudos all over the place for being very reactive and doing the right thing. So I'm overall tired, but very positive about the future after or post-COVID. So Orville, back to you. You're on mute. Orville, you're still on mute.
About some of the issues, a lot of which we had not contemplated. But I think to the credit of the labor/industrial relations movement and the ministry, as far back as maybe almost 20 years ago, when we had the discussions relating to flexible working hours, we ended up ultimately, I think, with a piece of legislation which is rather skinny and that left out a number of the considerations. But one of the things that was being considered was to legislatively implement remote work as part of the contract. And so now we have a kind of not yet new normal, but I'm thinking, we still have the fundamental responsibility, ladies and gentlemen, for the protection of the working environment within which the individual works. The employer has that responsibility. So then, big question, will the employer be now responsible, bear in mind the fact that the household is a proxy place of work, have the kind of common law responsibility or the responsibility which is outlined in the Labor Relations Code, as well and the impending Occupational Safety and Health Bill? Will we have that now implied or even explicit? If something happens to me at home, now while I'm working from home, is my employer responsible? Interesting. And another thing running through my head as well, you know, what happens when this becomes a quote unquote new normal? And then what do you end up with? You see, when the new terms and conditions of employment have been given to me, I live more than 10 miles away from where my original place of employment is. And I think that there's a piece of legislation that speaks to that. Food for thought. Lambert Brown, the mic is yours.
And greetings to the other panelists.
Yes.
And to the...
Not hearing you so clearly, Lamy.
I'm saying greetings to you,
yes,
to the other panelists, and to the people participating in this virtual town hall meeting. I want to start by saying what Rahm Emanuel from Chicago is quoted as saying, a crisis is a terrible thing to waste. And for me, we make the mistake of thinking that COVID-19 is the new crisis. For me, COVID-19 has brought the health issues to the fore. But underlying before COVID were some fundamental issues that needed to be addressed in the workplace. We have, for example, established the Labor Market Reform Commission, whose result is still gathering dust in terms of implementation. I don't know, so that the country has recognized for a long time that we need to make fundamental changes. The health impact of COVID has caused us to look again at these issues. So it's not really new. You're not going to hear me use beyond this, the new normal, because the normal needed to have changed long ago, and for us to recognize things. And I want to say one thing that the COVID crisis has done is to finally recognize the value of what is called essential workers. Be they the workers packing the supermarket shelves, be it the sanitation workers, be it the nurses, the doctors, the technicians in the hospital. This crisis has now led some people to say, Rotted, I didn't know that these people were so important. And if you look at their wages, you find that for too long, we have treated them badly, despite the efforts of people like Roddy and the other trade unionists. We have not been able to make these workers really feel and become essential. So, in a sense, what COVID has done is to tell us that they're essential. And I hope that post-COVID, we will recognize the essential nature of these people. So when we negotiate with the nurses and the police and the doctors and the public sector workers, we will understand the value of their service. I want to move to the issue of layoffs, because when COVID hit us, there was confusion about how do you treat layoffs. And I believe you'll be aware, and others will be aware, that prior to 1987, somebody could be laid off indefinitely. And
It's 86 then.
well, I said prior to 86.
They're old people.
So let me make it clear. For example, there's this case where a worker was laid off. Took the case to the Industrial Dispute Tribunal. The tribunal ruled that after a year plus, the person was unjustly dismissed. The employer took it to the courts, and the courts ruled that no, there's no evidence of dismissal. The person was laid off simpliciter. It was a simple layoff. And then the parliament came and made the adjustment, which when I look at the legislation this morning, it said this notice is included because of 1987. That's why I use 87 Harville, but of course, issue came. So the parliament addressed the issue of layoff, that you can't lay off somebody beyond 120 days. And after 120 days, the person have a right to make a claim for redundancy, which has to be dealt with. It's clear to me that we need to look back at our laws, post 74 Employment Termination and Redundancy Payment Act, post Labor Relation and Industrial Dispute Act of 75. We need to look to see how we address issues like layoffs, because it came upon us suddenly in the 80s. Now with COVID, with the massive layoffs in the country, we need to look to see how we can address that. And so we need new legislation to tackle how we treat these temporary situations. The law requires employers to report every layoff to the Ministry of Labor. I think that's more in the breach than in the compliance, and that's part of the law that needs to be looked at. Some of the layoffs, in fact, most of them are unavoidable. So let me admit that. And that brings me to the question of the jobs in the current situation, pre-COVID and post-COVID. Many of the jobs that we believe are important and should exist now are really jobs that are redundant. Let me just take a simple one. A messenger on the university campus, Harville, used to ride a bicycle, carry mails from here, Department A to Department B. Well, a little system called send, a button called send, has eliminated all such jobs. The government have tax offices that are crowded every day. And there are people inside there, cashiers, etc., who, if you apply the send button, whether on your phone or your computer, and pay your bills online, a lot of those jobs are gone. And you could take that throughout the workplace and you see jobs that are no longer there. The famous one is, as an artist, you had to relate to photography and the need for camera, the need for films and so forth, and all of that technology. That has been replaced by a simple cell phone. So technology has meant that pre-COVID, post-COVID, during COVID, we have to look at the nature of the jobs. And so I developed a couple of years ago, in fact, more than a decade ago, something called MAP. What is a MAP? My alternative plan to where I am now. So, if I'm working in the public sector, the job I'm doing may not exist 5 years from now. Me already have been redundant. So what is the alternative? Am I going back to school? Am I going to learn some new skills so I can become self-employed? Am I going to be looking to the areas in the economy, public or private, where I can be retrained? So, for example, a job as a nurse, male or female nurse, let me get the gender issue because there's no lead coming on after, is a highly sought after job in the world. If I was a public sector worker, if I'm working at the post office, for example, where we're still operating manually, I may want to upgrade myself through my MAP to look to become a nurse or whatever other skills are there. The young man spoke about the blue economy and all of that. These are areas that we have to look to see where relevance is and not where we. So the MAP is something I urge because that would lead to retraining. For example, and all else, you go into a supermarket now and you can self-checkout. That cashier is gone. And I've been into places where some of the back-breaking work that is done on a farm, the computers taking care of that. There's a time when there are thousands of workers in the backside industry, but the technology has meant that there are less workers now in the backside industry doing much more work. And this happens in manufacturing every day. So that what COVID should focus us on beyond the health element is the new world of work. And for us to recognize, including trade unionists, that some of what is happening now is really the past and we have to be prepared for the future. And that's where my head is at. Remote work from home. Again, I could link that. I said as much when we debated the flexi work bill, that this wasn't really flexi work, and that we really need a bill that dealt with flexi work. In other words, we amended the Town and Planning Act. We amended something which says that a female shouldn't be required to work a night shift. That's not real flexi work. Flexi work is what was forced upon us the other day when we say work from home. And in fact, it may be better for many people to work from home. And Roddy, the issue of productivity. It's about measurement. And we ought to be measuring everything we do. So you can measure it at home. You can measure it in the factory floor. You can measure it in the office. And so the productivity center that we have is playing a big role and can continue to play a major role, whether at the BPO or the knowledge processing center or at the backside plant or at the bread, at the bakery, wherever we perform work, we need to be seeing it from the lens of productivity. And I think that's something that we need to continue to push, COVID or no COVID. COVID just give us a break, a window in terms of the health, but the issues were there before. In terms of the legislative process, clearly we need a new flexi law. One of the acronyms we have been getting in the last, from everywhere in the world in the last 3 months is PPE, personal protective equipment. We have a bill now before a Joint Select Committee, which addressed the PPE issue. And we say we want to give workers a greater say. But in all of this COVID discussion at the governmental level, task force to look at reopening a BPO, but there's no involvement of the workers. So the absence of workers' participation, workers' involvement is missing in this COVID. And no wonder the unions are complaining that the government is rushing to reopen without involving and talking to the union people. So they're talking only to the owners of capital, to the private sector. So I hope that in this COVID crisis, the issue of worker participation, worker involvement, inclusion, social dialogue would be foremost as a vehicle to take us out of this. Occupational safety and health, as I said, before a Joint Select Committee, it needs to be fast track. It should have been ready from last year, August, for independence. We tried for December. I really want to see it fast track because one thing the COVID crisis has taught us is the protection of workers, the personal protection equipment in whatever form, in the home, at the factory, on the bus, wherever it is. So I find that is necessary. Arvil, in this COVID thing, if people can get a chance to reread the book or read it, Who Moved My Cheese? That will be very helpful for people to understand that once upon a time, to make a telephone call to anywhere abroad, you have to go and line up at Duke Street at Jamintel. I can call you when you go to Saudi Arabia now to your pilgrimage. I can call you from my cell phone. Well, you don't have to go to Saudi. To Rome. If you go to Rome, I can call you from my bedroom to say, Arvil, so and so. In other words, technology and globalization has changed the situation. Work is very tenuous, and we need to identify where real work is and move together as a country towards it. Maybe I've spoken too long, but those are my contribution I want to make at this point.
Well. And who said that the trade unions and the trade unionists were only involved in a narrow thing called collective bargaining, where they discuss improvements in terms and conditions of employment, in terms and wages, etc. We heard the senior trade union is speaking about what sounds like labor market analysis and labor market planning and labor forecasting. Yeah, so sounds good, Lamy. I think one of the wonderful things that we have in this democracy, though, is that we have a system that has been pushed and touched and stuff by different sides, different administrations. But the wonderful thing is that we have two parties in parliament on both sides, who are labor parties, as in both houses of parliament. And so sometimes they, at different points in time, they might seem to move away from the roots a little bit, but we have two Labour parties, different names, but it's Labour parties, and Lammy can't deny that one. The occupational safety and health bill, Lammy, I agree with you. I think it's really should be much further ahead, but looking at it, it's a pretty robust proposal. So all things being equal, we will get there. You know, before we get to the cream of the presenters, yes, I have to exercise my bias. In fact, I've known her before I know all of you all. Yes, even before I know you, Lammy, Leaton. You know, this thing about layoff and redundancy, etc. I do remember that case, so I'm dating myself, and ultimately the legislative decision, legislative amendment that took place later on. Right? But you know, as we look at the ETRP Act, you realize that, of course, that also will need some more amendment, overdue, because it has a very, very narrow number of illnesses that are covered in the schedule. And you are absolutely right. Essential workers, the ILO gave us a template that says something about the cessation of work in that sector is likely to lead to the death or serious harm to a significant portion of the population. It means very likely, Lammy, that when we open the category, more people will be added. But what impact will that have on the procedure for collective bargaining and the freedom and right to strike? Think about that going forward.
I don't want to interrupt.
All right. All right, Lammy, bless you. All right, Leith Dunn, sociologist, colleague and friend.
Yes, good morning, folks, and thank you very much. I think this is an excellent panel and I'm learning a lot. I want to look at the impact of this COVID-19 on unearthing the inequalities in the labor market and in what we call the gender division of labor, in the household, in the workplace, and also at the highest level of decision-making, which is in politics. So we have a national policy for gender equality, which was established in 2011. And it says we have to mainstream gender in everything. And that's what we do at the Institute for Gender and Development Studies. We have a UWI gender policy, we have training programs, do research and so on. So in looking at this issue of COVID-19, I'm looking at it through a gender lens. And if we look at the layoffs and the job cuts, we have to look at who has been impacted and how. Earlier it was quoted that women have a higher rate of unemployment, particularly the younger women. But I also use a gender lens to recognize that persons with disabilities, men and women with disabilities, are also going to be differentially impacted with these layoffs. And already they were very vulnerable in terms of having less employment. If we look at our goods producing sector, the mining, agriculture, and manufacturing, we're going to be thinking through about the job losses as we restructure the economy, as we go through the period when people are unable to work. In the agricultural sector, let us not forget those men and women who are agricultural workers. And I'm not talking about the employers now. I'm talking about those who work and support our food security. Then in the services sector, we know that the banking sector is primarily female in terms of at the lower levels. In the retail sector, one of the things that COVID-19 has unearthed is the importance of the health sector. And we know that the majority of the nurses, all of those frontline workers, the majority of them are females, although we know also that many of them are doctors. So one of the blessings of the COVID-19, if we can call it that, is putting a lens on this gender division of labor and seeing who does what. In the transportation sector, I'm very concerned about the males that dominate in that sector and the job losses. Many of them depend on each day's income for them to be able to support their families. Then I think of the tourism workers. The hospitality industry is the lifeblood of our country and our region. And it means that the workers in that industry have been very fragile. They're very fragile. Many of them have been laid off. Hopefully, if we have a restructuring of our tourism industry and have more local tourism, we'll see some of those jobs come back. Next, I want to talk about what we're seeing is that the COVID-19 has made us very fearful and fragile, but there are also lots of opportunities that are available to us. And as Lambert and others have been talking about the future of jobs. If we look next at the remote working conditions, that unequal sharing of domestic work and the care economy is something that is facing us globally and nationally. And it means that even while juggling the work from home, it has meant that in single female-headed households, those women are having to also do the homework, help the kids with the homework, deal with the fights or what have you, as well as do the other cooking, cleaning, and caring. If you have persons in the household who are sick, they're all having to be juggled those kinds of issues. So all of those multiple duties, what we call the productive, reproductive, and community management work, all of that is brought to the fore. I also want, as we're looking at the household, the domestic workers, this is an area that we have done work on with the Ministry of Labor. And the situation facing the Jamaica Household Workers Union and the thousands who I hope will join as a result of this, because they recognize the importance of belonging to an organization, is that they are very vulnerable. And it has a knock-on effect. What COVID-19 has done is said, if people are home, they may have less use of domestic workers on a day-to-day basis. And these are women, the majority of them, who are supporting their families. So we need to find out what we can do moving ahead to ensure the protection of domestic workers, recognizing that they are essential workers for the economy to go on. I've been looking also at the migrant workers. Around the world, the economies are collapsing because migrant workers are being sent home or they're displaced or what have you. So let us look at them. Still in these working relationships at home, some of our children are unprotected, and the child labor issue is in fact something that I continue to be concerned about. Human trafficking, those are forms of work that we need to ensure that moving forward, we improve protection and eliminate that. So much also is the caregiving work. We are in the demographic transition. You have more older persons, so we have more persons who are at home to be looked after. And there's an army of caregivers for those persons who are vulnerable and have to be staying at home, which we need to see how we can regularize them, train them, and equip them more effectively. On income support, I'm giving thanks for the innovations that we're seeing all around the world with the food banks. Or Pastor Reverend Astor Carlisle preached a sermon a few weeks ago about Jesus saying that none of the fragments be lost when he fed the 5,000. And I keep thinking about us collecting all the food that is produced in our country and ensuring that none of it is wasted, that those can go into food banks. And then there's the whole value chain along that in terms of the delivery services, which others have spoken about. On the legislative framework, I want to really strongly echo the call for the Occupational Safety and Health Act to be enabled, whether it is within, it has implications for within the household as well as in every single workplace. Think about it, as we see the coronavirus, raising its head and we learn more about it, every single place that has people is going to have to be sanitized, right? So we're going to need to train our human resource managers, our cleaners, and everyone to make sure that the workplace is safe, even when we do go back out and so on. The other thing I would say, however, is that in looking forward, I see a lot of opportunities. So we have spoken about the blue economy, using the oceans that we have around us in abundance. So we shouldn't have any water shortages moving forward. We shouldn't have any energy shortages. But we also have the cultural and creative industries, the orange economy. And I'm really encouraged by the various opportunities that have been created and people doing things online using technology, as Lambert and others have been talking about. But moving forward, I want us to also be doing a lot more on making sure that we have a universal minimum wage for everyone. We see the US scrambling to have that. We see the UK doing the same. And I want to ensure that we create a universal basic wage for everyone. I think architects and those who design buildings will have a lot of work to do moving forward in terms of how we design space, whether it is in terms of our schools, offices, churches, and so on. So that's a whole other area of creating a safe space in the design and operation of our buildings. Next, we need an army of community health workers, contact tracers, counselors, the mental health issues, all of that support, because COVID-19 has exposed how fragile or exposed the fragility of several of people, and we need to make sure that they can in fact recover. I echo what our youth advisors spoke about in terms of rethinking education. Education should be lifelong. So we have to be constantly retooling ourselves in terms of supporting our students to adapt and create, and they're very innovative, right? So how do we support them in terms of their business ideas and so on? And I also want to underscore the point about broadening citizen participation. So we want equal numbers of women and men. We want diverse groups in terms of decision making. We want to ensure that in our communities that there are opportunities. I'm not talking about big town halls. I want us to ensure that everyone has a voice and that voice can help to shape the future. And finally, I just want to speak about the gift of the ILO Decent Work Agenda, which we have spoken about. So yes, there will be new opportunities. Let us see how we can innovate, use the digital platforms that we want to expand to create more opportunities for online work for both men and women. How do we ensure that we balance between our personal life, our work life, and our family life? Because the family, as a sociologist, you would respect Orville that this is very, very important. Stability and security at work, having equal opportunities. We have a lot of gender inequalities in the workplace, that this is an opportunity for us to see how we can change them. And finally, just saying we need to really strengthen health and social security. So those are the thoughts that I wanted to share. There's much more, but the time is limited and so on.
Oh, I have to really commend the presenters for the way in which you have managed your time. Really, really good. We're doing very well. Before we move in the direction of taking some questions. Oh, I think we actually have Mr. One should have joined us. Has he joined us? David One. I was looking to see if he has joined us, but I'm not seeing him joining us. I don't know if he's here. If we don't have him, then we move towards the question and questions in just a little bit of Q&A. But Leith, of course, being a sociologist myself, I can't understate or overstate either way the importance of family, because you remember that is where the real primary socialization takes place, and we mess it up right there. And believe it or not, as we talk about all these kinds of social pathologies, people are talking about these myths about broken families and female-headed household and a lot of stuff like that. And some of those things make some sense, but when the primary socialization, such as, when mothers torture their boys, that's a great predictor of homicidal behavior. But here's a paradox though, going forward. There's a period, Lam will remember, when we had minimum wages, one for household workers and another one generally. There was some evolution, and in 1982, we had the first minimum wage for security workers. And at the time, the dynamic was different. But do you know that as we speak now, if you were to have a minimum wage for household workers again, the irony of that is that the female-dominated household work, which is what is supposed to be the overall picture, is going to be undervalued, even though a significant amount of household work that takes place outside, and it's males doing it. And quite interestingly, as we speak about security workers, which is stereotypically male-dominated work, stereotypically, because of the heavy lifting, etc. But in reality, you're talking about women outnumbering men 2 to 1 in the Jamaican security industry. Isn't that a paradox? And great food for thought. We don't have David, do we? No, we don't have him, right? No, we don't have him. Okay. Well, okay, all right. I got that one here. I have a couple of questions which are coming in, which I am going to take. I want to just thank you, panelists, for speaking. Give yourselves a round of applause. All right. Clapping yourself, no man. Come on, keep it. Don't make it look boring. Jillian, all right, you know. All right, good. So I have a couple of questions here. I am going to pull them up from my, here is one. What are some recommendations coming out from the employers regarding layoffs during this period? Let's see who would take that one now. Deborah, that will be yours. Your mic is muted.
Yes, just on the unmute. I guess I can speak freely as a representative of the GSAJ, and then kind of on with my Caribbean HR hat on. We're encouraging our members, of course, we want to keep as many people employed as possible. So right from the get-go, we've been pushing and encouraging our members to look at work at home as a new normal, to keep people employed. And whatever that entails, like, we just have to grab that bull by the horns and avoid layoffs. And also the Ministry of Labor as well has been very helpful, as well as in reminding everyone about layoffs and how to do them properly. I think my own personal thoughts about this, being an HR outsourcer, is I'm encouraging folks that if you have to look at layoffs as a way to survive sometimes. So the business landscape has changed. A lot of your clients may have walked out, or they're taking time to revisit whether or not they need your service or your product. So in order for you to survive, sometimes layoffs have to be done, not because you can't afford labor, but because you have to restructure for your new normal. And I would just encourage employers that if that has to be done, do it in time so that you don't run out of cash and have to close your business, which hurts everybody. Do the layoffs. But what I would like to see is for it to be done sensitively, meaning that I can't remember who was talking about it, but there are other new jobs that are emerging now. And I think the employers can look and be able to assess the skills. I mean, you're working with people sometimes for years that you have to lay off. You know what they're good at. You can certainly encourage your HR, if you have HR, or reach out to your own contacts to try to outplace the employees. For example, I'll use the call centers, for example. If you know that someone has great customer service skills and you need to lay off a whole team of maybe 10 customer service agents, there's customer service opportunities that are existing in other fields and in other companies, maybe local companies. I think now, just ethically, it would behoove the employer to try to make those links and do an outplacement. Our companies helped sometimes in the past, we've helped, but you don't need an agency to come out and help you to do that. You just need to kind of use your contacts and your networks to be responsible for your employees and help them to find new work. Unfortunately, I haven't seen a lot of that yet, but I think because people right now are still trying to secure and keep people's jobs, but in the next little while, I think there will be some hard decisions, and I'm just encouraging employers to do what you can to help people to stay employed. If not with you, with someone else.
All right, thanks, Deborah. I'm going to ask you to probably keep your mic open a little bit because the next question is for you. But I don't want this one to slip. I forgot to speak about it. The question of redundancy, right, and layoff, intrinsic in all of that is the management's right to manage, because you have to make these decisions. But there's been a recent decision in the courts. The name of the case has just slipped me. Probably need a little bit more coffee. But in essence, it pretty much says that yes, there may be a right of the employer to lay off and to make workers redundant, but it is not an untrammeled right. It must be mitigated by a number of processes, which are not unlike the processes which are outlined in the binding labor relations code, right? And that's a discussion, I think, for another time, though. But so the other question for you, though, Deborah, is how are the workers coping with the new normal in the BPOs? What has been the community reaction to your workers' discrimination? Discrimination?
Say the last part again. What has been? I didn't catch the discrimination part.
It's a question, actually.
Okay.
So what has been the community reaction to your workers? Has it been discrimination?
Oh, okay. To be honest, when we're looking at, to be honest, most of the employees are working with large centers. And when you have large centers, like you look at the Portmore community, for example, a lot of people there are in that BPO industry. So there's this knowledge of how it is. Some of them are working from home as well before the whole push from COVID to work from home. So we haven't heard a lot of discrimination. I've seen it in the media, but I've never heard of any cases among our membership. So again, working remotely, for example, you could be a small call center. How you're getting your business is often some overseas entity has work from home agents in the US or in Canada, and they're pushing their work from home work to us. And we have the option to make them work from home or to make them work in a center. So with the COVID thing, working from home is not that foreign. Forcing it is foreign, but not that foreign. And I think out in the communities, at the beginning of the whole Alarica incident, people were starting to paint us with the brush. So if you're a BPO, even if you're located like the new one over St. Thomas or St. Mary or in Montego Bay, where there are so few cases, people, were kind of afraid because, oh, BPO, you could be sick. But at the same time, there's just so many jobs, and we're talking about 40,000 people who already knew that they had no issues with COVID and that their environments were kind of safe. So I didn't experience direct complaints that, oh, I'm being discriminated against. It was kind of looming, but no actual cases of, overt discrimination. That's my experience. I don't know about other industry.
Yeah. All right. Thanks, Deborah, because you have another one. There are a couple of other questions, which I'll pass on to other panelists. Is the BPO sector considering to move more of its workforce to remote work systems?
I think it's a new normal for real. Mm-hmm. And there's so much investment now on making that work. And it's not just the BPOs. There's the telecommunications that had to basically go throughout the entire nation of Jamaica to make their internet lines workable to enable work from home for BPOs and for the rest of the population who's doing this. So we're talking about hard wires and cables, like it's significant costs and significant investments that even if COVID were to leave tomorrow, I think we built this new way of working that's not going to go away. So.
All right, got you. For those persons who don't know, and I know Lame has it in front of him on his desktop, I know Gillian has it, and the question I think is going to come to Gillian a little bit. But for those persons who might be contemplating taking discriminatory action against persons who they suspect have any kind of chronic or social, socially stigmatized disease, illness, that there is very likely to be a very special tribunal, part of the tribunal, the IDT, which is established, which is likely to be established to be dealing with matters of discrimination. So, you know, public education, that might be the next forum going forward. So as we seek to be much more equitable, because, you know, Leith, when we talk about elimination of discrimination, it's based on everything. And certainly, we have signed on to conventions, etc. And even if we haven't signed on to the conventions, we are bound by the 8 fundamental human rights conventions of the ILO. I have—
Yes, can I just make a quick comment on that? I think that's an opportunity for us to do a lot of information and communication to deal with the fears that people are feeling that are manifested in discrimination.
Yes.
And we're surprised at some of the things that we read about in the media, but it's an opportunity for us to package information, break it down, and ensure that the person on the street understands what is happening and everyone is in fact vulnerable. So we shouldn't discriminate.
All right, and stay right on the podium there. This one is yours. Question for Dr. Dunn. Remote working can be a horror story for women experiencing domestic violence. So I agree with the BITU rep that workers should have a choice. What is your perspective? Okay, so domestic violence is one of the things that we have seen increase across the world, and it has exposed another epidemic, a whole pandemic. And for example, in South Africa, they've set up a whole commission to actually deal with this in the COVID period. In the UK, we have seen them providing special allocations for hotline and so on. So working from home can be a torture for women who are the majority of those who experience domestic violence. Although, of course, we say men also do, right, Orville? Absolutely.
But the point I'm making is—
and we talk about domestic violence, by the way,
this is a pandemic.
Yes.
So this is a pandemic that undermines productivity. It has intergenerational impact on children. And I think we need to treat it a lot more seriously in terms of the reporting and in terms of the interventions, and also the support systems which are needed for both males and females. So we need interventions, and these are jobs for the batterers. And some of them do work. We have, for example, the Brothers for Change program that was introduced many years ago, the Family Planning Association and the Correctional Services, where men learn to take responsibility, how to manage anger and so on. So COVID-19 has exposed all of those vulnerabilities. We have the need, for example, in the healthcare system to be screening for gender-based violence, so we get a better sense. And also reporting, the reporting systems. So lots of work to do. A lot of work has in fact been done, and there are opportunities for us to do it better.
All right, got you. I have another one here. Oh, wow. Women in the informal sector who are in the shadows, like sex workers, they have been affected negatively by COVID-19 as their working hours intersects with the curfew hours. Also, there are further risks because their work requires them to be in close proximity with clients. Sex workers are often women who have to take care of their families as well. That sounds like a question. Yes. Maybe Lee might want to take again. But yes, hold on a second. But before I open the mic for you. The Ministry of Labor's remit has to do with generally people who work under contracts of service or contracts of employment. Although it may very well look like a contract work, that might be a contract for services. But beyond that, given that the objects of the service provided would be unlawful, it would really be outside of the remit of the ministry. But go ahead, though, speaking sociologically.
Okay, so as you know, one of our graduate students in the social sciences that I'm supervising is doing her PhD social protection for sex workers.
Yes.
And one of the, in speaking to her as our supervisor, she said, for example, they said, well, Easter never keep. Easter having been an opportunity to do sex work, and because of COVID-19, there was no work. That has an impact on employment of those women and also their ability to protect their families and provide for their families. So part of what we need to be doing moving forward is, do we decriminalize sex work and make it safe as it has been, or safer in some countries? Like, for example, in Curacao, where they have work permits for sex workers, there are regulations around doing that. There's the issue too of occupational safety and health, right? So if there are protections around HIV, ensuring protection and so on, how do we ensure that if it is an industry which is going to exist anyway, formally or informally, that we can in fact protect those workers? And of course, those women are also subject to violence, violence from clients and so on. So they might do the work and not get paid, right? So there's another discussion that we need to have around the rights of sex workers, social protection for them. They cannot apply for NIS as sex workers because there's no registration, yeah? So that's more work that we need to look at as we move forward.
You know, I totally agree with you. You know, in the OSH proposed legislation, there is indeed a section which has to do with, the scope of it also has to do with HIV and AIDS at the workplace, consistent with the ILO's 2001 policy, as well as that of CARICOM, and the ministry, the government has signed on to those policies. But one of the issues that we have been failing to grapple with, Leith, is that many of the people who have been advocating protection for persons who are exposed to HIV have been sexual minorities. And the message that they have been raising and advocating hard for is the fact that the message that they would want to give to their constituents can be given because it would be aiding and abetting an unlawful act. But using the same platform, there's absolutely no difference between aiding and abetting an unlawful act by giving the same kind of advice and coverage to sex workers, because both are unlawful activities which put the individual at risk. But so that's fertile ground. I have another one here. With the advent of COVID, the gaps in labor legislation have been laid bare. What steps will the ministry of Labor be taking to do a thorough review of the current cadre of legislation? Gillian, I think we both can answer that question, but go ahead. Yes, Gillian.
Okay, thank you very much, Orville. The Ministry of Labor has been having discussions with the tripartite, and we do it through the Labor Advisory Council. And we too recognize that there are many issues that have confronted us, things that we would not have ordinarily had to deal with. The pandemic has brought it to the fore. When we look at layoff, a lot of persons have said to us, employers, that, oh, we are having severe challenges. The period of layoff is too short. The workers are saying 1 day of layoff is too much because I go home without a salary. There are some persons that are saying, oh, other countries have pandemic leave. When a country is locked down, there's a community lockdown as in St. Catherine. How are we to treat with payments? Is it that as an employer, I am to pay workers? Workers are saying I should be paid my commission, not just my basic pay during a period of lockdown in St. Catherine, because I did work. Now you have a lot of issues that have come to the fore. And I will admit that it is right time for us to look at some of these very issues. And the Ministry of Labor doesn't work singularly. We work as part of the tripartite. Jamaica is one of the countries that has totally subscribed to the tripartite approach, and we work with the employers and trade unions in a way that causes positive and balanced change. And certainly coming out of these kind of discussions, and I can't say coming out of COVID because COVID seems to be something that will become part of our norm. But moving forward, we will have to find some solutions legislatively. Some of the solutions may not be requiring legislative change, but more policy changes, as we heard in the BPO example, the example of how they would have changed their business processes to respond to some of these new requirements. And certainly, Lambert is here. He will agree that the OSH legislation took a while in coming, but you know something? Everything for a reason, because now that we have experienced COVID-19, we're able to shore up that OSH legislation so that it will respond to issues and situations as presented by COVID-19.
All right. And, you know, Gillian, you know, I have to be honest, and I will say this without any fear whatsoever, that I have a front seat in the discussion which is going on right now. And I am fully aware, speaking, and I have to speak honest, that the ministry is really making a concerted effort to not just have the discussion with the Labor Advisory Committee, which is of course statutory and which is required, but also it is engaged in trying to get a lot of information in. I'm part of that, can't speak too much about it. As a matter of fact, can I tell you something? That the COVID pandemic has pretty much resulted in a reconsideration of almost everything that I was looking at from January because of this whole dynamic. But I can say without any fear whatsoever that I am very, very proud of what the Ministry of Labor and overall, you know, what we have been doing as an industrial relations labor movement. You want to put it whatever label you want to it. I think that that this is one way in which we have been adjusting to it in a very positive way with all the parties. So I feel good about that, and so commendations. I have another question here. It is my understanding that while the nation is getting prepared mentally and physically to return to work next month, some employers are only now just laying off workers. What could account for that, and what is the ministry's view on that? And we have like a minute for that response, because that's you, Gillian, again.
Oh, thank you, Orville. Well, unfortunately, there are some employers that are just now feeling the severe impact of the economic challenges that have been brought on by COVID-19. And there are genuine cases where persons are going to be continuing to lay off as employers. They have their realities to face. But the Ministry of Labor has been continuously urging employers to look at other options, look at rotations, look at remote working, because, you know, the countries that are able to keep working, to keep producing, will be ahead in the recovery, economic recovery. And I can't say post-COVID because I believe COVID will be here. But when I say recovery, it means that having had the effects of COVID in its intensity, while we move to rebuild, it will be companies, organizations that keep working that are going to be able to grow exponentially in the new normal, the new world of work. Because we're not going back to what we were before COVID. I can guarantee you of it.
All right. I wonder if you can, we're almost out of time. We have two questions here. I probably might have to pinch them. We heard companies like J.C. Penney filing for bankruptcy. If that should happen here, in Jamaica, what would happen to workers who were laid off or not recalled? And second, and another question, we heard a number of cases where non-unionized companies gave their staff an increase in January, but owing to COVID reversed it in April. Is that okay and legal? The first question is, I think I'll just take that in the interest of time. The Employment Termination and Redundancy Payment Act allows for a layoff of up to 120 days. After that 120 days, the employee has a right to claim to be made redundant, that is to be dismissed for the purpose of redundancy, and that has to take place within 14 and 60 days. After which, the worker has 6 months after that dismissal, right, to claim for redundancy payment. Okay. Now, of course, in collaboration with your employer, you may agree not to be terminated for redundancy because you expect, based on everything that the employer has been sharing with you, that at some point beyond 120 days you might go back. Right. I'm going to allow Roddy to answer that last question about non-unionized workers as to what the law says in regard to existing contracts and their reversal.
Well, where there is a contract of employment or that arrangement between an employee and their employer, and there would have been an agreement by virtue of something being put on the table and accepted by the worker by way of an increase, it would not be lawful, I believe, for them to unilaterally reverse it. What we would expect definitely is that where there is a problem, that the employer would engage with the worker, since we're speaking about non-unionized environments, and have that level of discussion. And that discussion would be for a specific time, having explained the specific conditions. What we have been finding though, is that a lot of employers, even at this time, and I including some of those who are only now moving to the layoff situation, have been abusing the situation a bit. We have been seeing letters coming out that are quite discriminatory against those persons who may have an illness. We have seen where persons may have put on a medical update form that I tend to have shortness of breath, and that is interpreted and diagnosed by somebody as them having asthma. And so they are forced to sign a form if they want to come back to work. I had to be dealing with that up to last night and the form actually says it's voluntary. So I say, the document itself is a lie unto itself, because you cannot be forcing me or withholding something if it's voluntary. You know?
Yes, got you. I think we're at the end. Temba wanted to say something because his hand was up. I don't know if we can squeeze him in before we get bumped off. You still with us?
Yes, I'm here.
Yeah, man, you wanted to say something. You have a few seconds there.
Well, yeah, primarily I was expressing my agreement with Dr. Dunn's statement that the context is very important and that there are lots of opportunities. And I wanted to speak on the youth unemployment that you had mentioned, because I think that there are some innovative methods that can be used to combat that. As I had mentioned before, education and the practicalization of education could play a major role in addressing that, because what we would be literally doing is cultivating a new type of labor force that would have, as a part of their educational process, been gathering nuanced community level knowledge. And as we expand into the future of work, where automation and machination will be taking away a lot of jobs that are, simple and menial, what will actually count is that nuanced type of knowledge in specific areas at the community level, and that can be projected perhaps where one community has found a solution for certain problems, can project that into the international market or wider national context. And there we can find new market opportunities for businesses and youth entrepreneurship, as well as for social entrepreneurship. Social entrepreneurship can be very important in addressing youth unemployment, because there are a lot of fragmented initiatives that are currently managed by youth and have significant monetization potential, but either don't get the opportunities because of inexperienced management, or are undermined by the competitiveness of fragmentation And as a result of that, they don't get to maximize the potential that they could bring to the communities that they're operating in, including earning potential and creating a new type of profession. Talk Up Youths, for example, is a great example of this, Def Can Coffee, and the private sector gets to come in here and under their corporate social responsibility should necessarily make contributions to developing the technical competencies of youth in that way.
Thank you very much, Temba. We can understand why you were elected to the guild, eh? Bless you. I'm looking at the clock on the wall, and I literally have a clock on the wall, and it's black. I realize that we are totally out of time. It has been a very educational and very uplifting one. Leith, you're in a different time zone, but you're pretty much exactly where we are. I came here early this morning with what I thought was, a body of knowledge, but at the end of the presentations, every single one taught me something I didn't know before. And in fact, all the questions that came in, I want to thank the persons who paid attention, those persons who were able to text in, to send in messages, those who were not able to but listened. We are doing this because we know that it is right. I certainly want to commend the Ministry of Labor and Social Security for doing this. It is something that is deep and dear to my heart. And those of you who have known me over the years know that it is a life work. And as we go forward to make the necessary changes, incorporating all of the partners involved, I certainly intend to be as close to the ministry as possible as we do things which are for the benefit of the nation and the region. Any final words? Quickly, a one word from everybody. Rudolph?
Yes, we have to ensure that we do the right thing at this time. We know that we're not turning back. COVID has put us on a particular trajectory. We have to move with it, but we have to put the right structures in place and to ensure that we maximize the learning experience from COVID.
That's well said.
I just wanted to put a plug in for MSMEs.
Yes.
MSMEs and the health sector.
And you mean medium, small, and micro enterprises?
Micro, small, and medium enterprises, which are the lifeblood of the economy. Lots of opportunities.
I got lost after the MSM, I bear in mind the earlier discussion. All right, got you. Yes, Deborah, you were saying.
I just think that it's a great time for a lot of dialogue because I see a lot of people talking often. Like, this dialogue is amazing. And I just think that it's an opportunity still. I think Jamaica has to be opportunistic. There's young people who are ready to work. There's new types of jobs that are coming out. We have an active Ministry of Labor and other Ministry of Health. Everyone's active. I think we just have to make sure that we have the guts, take more opportunities and find new ways of working and take as much work as possible now. I think Jamaica is doing an excellent job, and I'm really very positive about the future.
Lami.
A good session, and let's do it again.
All right. So a live work. All right. Chili, no. But Temba, you get another bite at the cherry before, but this one 10 seconds.
Okay, so the ministry.
Go ahead.
Are you hearing me?
Let him speak. You're up. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just saying that education, I think, is the crux of redesigning the labor force of the future and better integrating youth, both today and the youth of the future.
All right, bless you. And Jillian, what's your proper title? What's your proper title? I got one letter wrong, one word wrong yesterday.
There you go, 99%. So it's Divisional Director, Industrial Relations and Allied Services.
Okay.
And on behalf of the Ministry of Labor and Social Security, we want to say thank you to the panelists. We want to say thank you to the persons who participated in this session, and it will not be the last, certainly. The ministry remains committed to the principle that we have to move together. We have to move together to rise above the challenges that are presented from time to time in the labor market. We are committed to the review of the labor market. I heard Lami say that the report has been shelved, gathering dust, and I want to assure the public that the ministry is committed to movement in this regard, and in a way that no one will be left behind as we move together from strength to strength. Thank you very much.
All right, bless you. And thank you all, everybody, for participating. It was a wonderful way to spend my last 2 hours. And Deborah, I realize that you are an FIU person too.
Yes.
Yeah, all right.
Loved it.
God bless you all. Take care.
Yes, take care.